Yo, what's good everybody out there on YouTube? This is your man Shadicstick, dropping some hot frog on this mic, and today we're gonna be talking about the Sonic Adventure game everybody needs. Now, I'll be talking about my ideal Sonic Adventure game. If you have any thoughts, after this video or during the middle of this video of what you believe to be the ideal adventure game, go ahead and share them down in the comments below. You can have whatever ideal adventure game you want. It doesn't have to be restricted to what I believe is the ideal adventure game or the adventure game we need. While my favorite 3D playstyle for Sonic is the boost, I believe we should also recognize the gameplay style that started it all, the adventure style. To address what I would believe to be the ideal adventure style game, I will have to define what the style is, critique its flaws, and address what to improve on and address how the game should be executed. By the way, if you haven't already, please check out Jaden2602 Sonic Forces review. I'm featured in there and I give my full thoughts on the gameplay of Sonic Forces. I would highly appreciate it if you showed my boy Jaden2602 some love and checked it out. Now, before we delve too far into this video, I'd also like to list the games I consider to be adventure style: Sonic Adventure 1, Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, and Sonic 06. And without a further ado, let's begin. To address the adventure style, I believe we must do one thing, and that is to ask the question, what defines the adventure style? When talking about the adventure games, it's very easy to say that full 3D controls makes an adventure game. It's easy to say that momentum-based gameplay makes an adventure game. But what really defines that full 3D control? What really defines that momentum-based gameplay? In theory, almost all 3D Sonic games can fit this bill, as many of the games focus on Sonic's momentum being key in determining the pace of the gameplay and allow for Sonic to be controlled freely to some degree in a 3D space. Again, defining the adventure style is not so simple, so let's define it here. At least for me, to be an adventure game, a 3D Sonic game must fit this bill for the most part. It must have an open 3D linear level design, something I'll touch on a little bit more later. It must have Sonic's momentum escalate naturally based on his physics and how they interact within the environment, i.e. he should speed up when going down a hill, but should lose momentum as he goes up a hill. Something that's not really seen in the boost games for the most part. It should allow for full 3D camera control, which is something we haven't seen in the series for a while. And must be able to switch directions smoothly, something I believe people really mean when they mean full 3D control. That Sonic just doesn't, kind of lean left or right. He, turns in his entire direction changes based on where you move the analog stick when going at full speed even. Alright, now let's discuss that open 3D linear level design thing that I was talking about earlier. This is something I think Sonic Adventure 2 does extremely well. Let's just put this out on the table right now. The adventure games are linear no matter how you paint it. Most of the time, people confuse openness for non-linear. Having a wide open space does not change the fact that many of the stages, especially in SA1 and Sonic 06, lack a large array of branching paths and rely on the player going through one set path to reach the goal in many cases. This really isn't an issue, as it allows for the game's mechanics to work easily and without too much extra thought into which path is better to take, but rather, how am I going to use the game's mechanic to keep up the speed to reach the end in a timely manner. The openness or the wideness of the stage design itself is why many people assume the games to be non-linear, as the games will have large rooms or areas with many enemies or hazards, but will have usually only one way to the goal. Usually they'll have some small divergence, but this isn't really a branching path, as it does this for a few seconds and goes back to the main path. Games like Uncharted or even JRPGs like Kingdom Hearts to a large degree follow this philosophy of wide linear stages or levels. Usually there is one set path, you go down that path, but it's really wide, so you feel like there's an array of things to do or there's stuff to explore within that one path. Again, something that I think the adventure games did relatively well. Now, let's discuss some other points before wrapping up the gameplay portion, or what the adventure style actually is in terms of gameplay. The thing with Sonic's momentum is really simple, and for the most part is consistent throughout the entire series. The games rely on momentum. He's a fast hedgehog. Momentum is key in the platforming and keeping pace within these games. But it's just more noticeable when it comes to the 3D games in the adventure games, because the games work on 3 planes, an X, a Y, and a Z, and for the most part work within all 3 of those realms rather than just like an X and a Z or an X and a Y. Like the boost games. The boost games usually have 2D sections, or when you're just going down one set path and you worry about height rather than, you know, all 3 axes. You worry about, you know, your X and your Y, your Y and your Z, or your X and your Y, more so than you worry about working within all 3 planes. Momentum affects gameplay more often when it's working in an X, a Y, and a Z rather than just an X and a Y or Y and a Z. You get what I'm saying. Another thing I want to touch on lightly is the smooth direction change. This is what I think people mean when they say fully 3D. For example, Sonic and Generations can move in all directions, but not very smoothly, and especially when at full speed, he can only move basically from side to side. Whereas in the adventure games, 3D movement is smooth in terms of changing directions. If you're playing Sonic Adventure 2 and you're in, say for instance, City Escape, if you're moving full speed, Sonic can turn left and his entire body and direction changes to turn left, whereas in Generations, you would just move to the side slightly, but you would still go in that same general direction. While a game doesn't have to meet all the criteria listed above, I feel like it should fit mostly to be considered an adventure style game. And many people may shout Lost World to me, and I don't consider Lost World an adventure style game because it doesn't, there are too many places where it falls short of the list I stated. While it is the closest game that we've gotten in years to an adventure style game, Sonic's momentum doesn't really naturally escalate. It's based off of button presses, and it doesn't allow for that full 3D camera control. Another thing I have to say is, while the level design is open and linear, it's not necessarily wide, it's cylindrical, and it still keeps a lot of elements from the boost gameplay, and it's really just a happy middle ground between boost and adventure rather than being, you know, an adventure style or a boost game. Now let's look at some of the adventure style's flaws. The first issue of the adventure style is its slipperiness, with the exception of Sonic Adventure 2, which for the most part controls extremely well and tight, or 06, which is just a stiff mess. The adventure games for the most part are slippery. The best way to explain it is calling the other games running into the wall simulators, especially Shadow the Hedgehog. While SA1 doesn't have this issue to the extent of Heroes, and Shadow is still prevalent enough to fit it in this mode if you want. SA1 controls are okay up until Sonic starts going, you know, too fast, and then he's like a roller coaster. Heroes and Shadows feel like you're doggone skating on like ice lubed up with oil or something. And 06 is just a good soundtrack, so you really can't even play that because it's not even a game. 06 isn't even a game. Like, what are you trying to do? It's a soundtrack. And SA2 is just near perfect. It just has a few flaws outside of physics where, like, yes, sometimes when Sonic is fast, he can get a little, there are only a few instances where he feels slippery, but for the most part he controls extremely well. But the flaws outside of the physics can actually hinder it quite a bit sometimes. This isn't to say that all of the games as a whole control badly, but one of the major issues is that Sonic tends to become slippery, especially at points where he comes near curved surfaces or walls. When this happens, he usually goes up on the wall and he speeds up a bit, and it winds up just spiraling out of control. And then once he hits or touches another surface, he either completely slows down to a halt or still is not really controllable. To fix this, I believe the game should take an approach that combines the freedom and control of a Mario game but the speed of SA2. SA2 is the closest of the adventure style games to having tight controls while having Sonic maintain most if not all of his momentum and speed. The next major issue really in the adventure games is button mapping, especially in SA2. In SA2, many actions such as light speed, dash, grab, or bounce should be mapped to separate buttons, but rather than that, they're all mapped to the same type of action button. In SA2, there were multiple action buttons, but they all did the same thing. So again, please have actions mapped to different buttons. It goes a long way. They learned this with Unleashed when they tried to map boost and homing attack and air dash to the same button. People spoke up about this, and look at us now. We're doing great in terms of the overall control scheme when it comes to boost games. So if they were to implement this in the adventure style games, we would get a completely refined experience just from this. To be honest, the games at their core fundamentally should not work, but they somehow find a way to make do or work extremely well in the case of Sonic Adventure 2. The last question we should be asking ourselves, though, the last big one at least, is how should the game be executed? One thing that has plagued the Sonic games lately is execution, most notably in Sonic Forces with Classic Sonic, or just its story also in general. I think that even if a game is average, great execution can result in extremely great reception. The first thing I want to cover is other playable characters. I feel like if these are implemented, they should have individual stories and unique stages. I think the main reason I get turned off from Sonic Adventure 1 is because while the stage layouts may change, the stage aesthetics for each character don't feel unique, whereas SA2 would have characters explore the same area, but each area would feel unique because they had their own unique aesthetics and unique stage sets, something SA1 didn't do. The main reason why I think we need individual stories for the characters is to make each character feel unique and give them space to expand upon their own unique abilities and unique stage sets within the levels. This is one thing Sonic 06 tried, but again, failed miserably on in execution, and I believe it should be reattempted. Now, should they make their approach of using Sonic, Shadow, and Silver again? Maybe. But I feel like 06 was too ambitious for what little development time it had. So these characters, you know, while they were unique, things just weren't fleshed out like they needed to be because it was rushed. Now, one thing people may be wondering or asking about while watching this video is, what about hub worlds? Those were kinda important in the adventure games, especially, well, really just in Adventure 1 and 06, but still they're significant enough to talk about, and I have an answer for that. They haven't worked. Now let's go from the beginning of hub worlds and the end of hub worlds in Sonic games. Sonic Adventure 1 had a slightly confusing to navigate hub world, doubled with the camera that really didn't want to cooperate with the player. On top of this, the hub really didn't add to the experience. In many ways, it took away from the experience for the player. And while yes, this may be the first 3D Sonic game, and for its time, it may have been like, whoa, look at this, it wasn't done well, especially when you stack it up to other games around that time and around that time frame of about 5 years. It wasn't the best, even though it was on what could be considered the most powerful hardware up until the rest of the 6th gen consoles released. Look at Super Mario 64 as a nice, somewhat cohesive hub world, and it works leagues better than Sonic Adventure 1's. And I think that's what people don't understand. While yes, you could say, oh, you're just comparing it to a Mario game, I'm comparing it to a Mario game on inferior hardware. It shouldn't have a more confusing hub world and have it detract from the experience of the player. That, I feel, is just unacceptable, no matter what. Now, let's move on from Sonic Adventure 1. Let's talk about Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic 06, and it utilized many of the conventions of the adventure games, specifically Sonic Adventure 1, for better or for worse. 06's hub world was just big and empty. It was massive for a Sonic game, but it was just empty. And when using characters like Silver, it took forever to get anywhere. It was a big, empty, steaming pile of dog dookie. It added little to the game, and again, it had the right ideas in terms of just how they handled the hub world, such as adding missions throughout it and trying to connect it to other portions of the world itself. But again, it was poorly executed, and poor execution kills something that could be good. Now, before we move on, I just want to say that I'll be excluding Generations hub world for obvious reasons. This really doesn't have depth or anything. It's just kind of you go to one stage to the next. It's less of a hub world and kind of a glorified level select, though I think it did work extremely well and it was extremely well done. But let's talk about Unleashed. Unleashed did so much right with this hub world and did so much wrong. Now, the first of the wrong being the use of the constant load screens for the division of the smaller areas. This was one of the things that angered me about Unleashed. You walk 2 feet just to hit another load screen after entering the dang world. Another issue with Unleashed was the poorly executed collectathon system with the Sun and Moon medals. While I understand getting collectibles to progress through the game makes sense, Unleashed did it in a way that was annoying and had forced replayability onto the player, and instead of optional replayability, which hurts the player's experience. But what Unleashed did for hub worlds in the Sonic series that was good was make it cohesive, make it smaller, and so that these small challenges were sprinkled up throughout the stages and it connected the levels. It made them a lot more enjoyable and not feel like a hassle. On top of that, it was rare that the camera ever really interfered with the player's experience in the hub world. A great example of a hub world in a video game that I think the Sonic franchise should take a hint from if it ever does re-enter the realm of hub worlds is Super Mario Sunshine. While there are challenges sprinkled throughout Aldofino, it doesn't do anything to take away from the game, but it does find a way to unite all of the island's unique locales and feel like they are all a part of one world instead of feeling like multiple little worlds. So should we have hub worlds? Only if they build upon what Unleashed did and don't make artificial walls because the player skipped over one of the hundreds of medals in the game. So finally, let's get off these hub worlds and talk about story. To be honest, I think Sonic Team should keep going in the direction they took Force's story, but look at some of the many criticisms that came with it and that I have for it. First of all, don't make Tails a little puss boy that gets scared at the sight of Chaos Zero when he bopped Chaos 4. You really did ruin Tails as a character. While he was dwindling in importance within the games in the entire franchise of Sonic as it was already, Tails just became just one of the most annoying things to exist in gaming history because of Sonic Forces. Number 2, don't try to re-implement classic Sonic because it's just shoehorned in. Force's shoehorned classic Sonic game. I was hoping they would have at least some small reason as to why classic Sonic was in the game that was good enough to justify him being in the game because of the story. But no, they just shoehorned him in there. Now, number 3, if you make a new villain, don't have him be as shallow as Infinite. Geez, Mephiles was better in this regard. He wasn't as shallow as Infinite. While Infinite on the surface is cool, he's kinda like Goku Black. Sonic Force's story is just the Goku Black arc from Dragon Ball Super. He's really shallow. And the only reason why he's so evil is because of how petty he is. Number 4, do more explaining about what the character's motives are and how things came to be, how things are. Because a lot of things in Sonic Forces I felt weren't explained. And this happens in the other adventure games. There's some things that weren't explained in Sonic Adventure 2. While they didn't need to, they were small plot holes that, the player couldn't understand. Especially in Sonic Adventure 1. Sonic Adventure 1 suffered heavily from this. You would have some people have the argument that, oh, it's different characters' perspectives, but you can't have Tails beating Knuckles and then Sonic beating Knuckles in 2 different stories when it's supposed to be all one big story. 5. Continue the world building from Sonic Forces. This is one of the things that I think Sonic Forces did the best, and it's one of its best qualities. I think it really deserves more praise in this area. The world felt like Sonic Adventure 2's in the sense that there are unique environments, but the world felt cohesive because they use the same stage aesthetics with different design elements for each individual act or representation of that stage or act. One example from Sonic Adventure 2 that's really good is Skyroll and Pumpkin Hill. That's the same area, but they feel and look so vastly different. Number 6, I feel like they should keep this darker tone going because I feel like it entices the player to be intrigued more in the story and what is going on, and entices them to keep playing to know what happens next in this Sonic game story. That's one thing I think that really attracted people to Sonic Adventure 2 and Sonic Adventure 1 story. It was relatively dark because even games like Shadow the Hedgehog, while Shadow the Hedgehog was a pretty average and mediocre, which is badly average, while it was a very mediocre game, its story kept people wanting to know what happened because it was dark. And while it wasn't necessarily the best story, it was still a story that had people invested and intrigued. And while I don't necessarily hate the lighter side of Sonic, it doesn't keep people intrigued as often as the darker toned games. And the last one I have to say is committing to the story. I don't want another instance of the characters telling us all of the terrible things that happened, but with no visual representation for it. Something Forces did a ton because it was too scared to fully commit on its story. With all of this just piling up, I think that the adventure style should return, which I'm assured it will, and that it should follow all of these conventions in its execution. That being 3 separate playable characters, unique worlds, cohesive hub worlds that add more than they do detract, and a story with darker tones that commits fully to its atmosphere and storytelling. The adventure games, mostly 1, 2, and Heroes, are some of the most highly regarded games of all time. And while you may not agree with everything that I said in this video, I believe that what type of adventure game we should get if we get another Sonic game, or just what type of Sonic game in general we should get, would be a highly debated topic. Now, if you have some other feelings about this, or if you agree or disagree with this video at all, make sure you go ahead and go down in that comment section, comment, like, and subscribe to me. You know, it really does help your boy out. Make sure you go down in the description and donate. It really does help. Not mandatory, but it really does help the channel grow and helps your boy eat another ramen noodle pack of the day. And if you want to sponsor my channel so that, you know, your boy can keep eating them ramen noodle packets, the link to my YouTube gaming version of my channel is linked down below. If you hit the little sponsor button, it's only $5 a month, and it basically is like a Twitch subscribe button. Your boy gets the money and survives another day on ramen noodles. Guys, this has been your man Shadicstick, and I'm out. Peace. Kiss, kiss.